It all started with a leak. Not just any leak, but one so explosive, so meticulously timed, that the moment it landed, it sent shockwaves through the corridors of both the media and the palace. Imagine checking your phone, thinking it's just another day of scrolling headlines, only to find a message that changes everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle, about Harry, and about the glittering, secret world they move in. The message came from Markus Anderson, a name few outside certain exclusive circles had ever heard, yet one that now carried a weight that could topple reputations. The words he shared weren't vague hints, rumors, or whispers. They were concrete, damning, and meticulously detailed. And the most devastating part? The fallout wasn't just public. It was deeply personal, hitting Harry where it hurt the most. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Picture Harry, privately grappling with a storm that had been brewing silently, now detonating before his eyes. His sense of betrayal, shock, and disbelief layered upon years of public scrutiny and personal struggle. How could someone he trusted, or perhaps someone so connected to someone he trusted, unleash a revelation that cut so close to the heart? And for Meghan, the narrative being spun was one that threatened to redefine her image overnight, painting her not as a duchess navigating the pressures of royalty, but as a player in a game where loyalty and discretion are currency, and losing either comes with a heavy price. But let's pause for a moment and ask the question that everyone is whispering behind closed doors. What really happened inside Soho House, that gilded sanctuary of the global elite, that seemingly innocuous club whose doors hide secrets few are ever permitted to see? Who were these shadowy VIPs, and what did they want from Meghan Markle? Why was she there, mingling, smiling, networking in ways that were invisible to the public eye but crystal clear to someone like Markus Anderson? And most importantly, why does Harry feel like everything he believed about trust, loyalty, and protection has been shattered in the wake of a single, devastating leak? Before we go further, consider this. The world has long been obsessed with the stories behind the royal veil, the untold narratives hidden behind palace walls and flashing cameras. But rarely does anyone get the insider perspective, the sort of granular detail that exposes not just the headlines, but the human stories beneath. The ambitions, fears, and calculated maneuvers that shape outcomes behind closed doors. Markus Anderson's leak isn't just another scandal. It's a revelation that lifts the curtain on a reality most will never glimpse, a reality where power, influence, and secrecy intertwine in ways that are simultaneously seductive and dangerous. And yet, the story isn't merely about Meghan being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's about the subtle manipulations, the calculated interactions, and the invisible hands that guide both perception and consequence. Every handshake, every whispered conversation, every curated photograph posted online feeds into a larger narrative, a narrative that now, thanks to Markus, is coming undone. The consequences are immediate, visible in Harry's private anguish and Meghan's careful, controlled public response, but they also ripple outward, touching everyone involved in ways few anticipate. Now, let's get deeper. Imagine walking into Soho House for the first time, a place known for its discretion, its curated exclusivity, a world where everyone knows the rules and everyone understands the stakes. Meghan Markle steps into this space not as a guest among equals, but as someone whose presence carries implications far beyond the glimmering chandeliers and hushed conversations. VIPs, influencers, and decision-makers move around her, calculating, observing, and, in some cases, taking advantage. Each interaction holds potential leverage, and every casual encounter could be weaponized in ways the public will never fully understand. And while the outside world sees merely glamorous images of a duchess enjoying nightlife and elite networking, Markus Anderson's leak strips away the veneer, exposing what lies beneath: alliances, exploitation, and secrets meant to remain buried. The impact on Harry is immediate and profound. His protective instincts, honed over decades of public life, are ignited in a way that is visceral and raw. He sees patterns that the average person misses, understands the implications of these interactions, and feels the weight of every misstep as if it were a personal affront. And all the while, the media, oblivious to the nuanced realities behind closed doors, begins to speculate, sensationalize, and distort, compounding the emotional intensity of the situation. Every headline, every social media post, every whisper adds fuel to a fire that Harry can neither ignore nor easily contain. As the world debates the ethics, the media speculates, and the public consumes, one question hangs over everything. What was Meghan's role in all of this? Was she an unwitting participant in a complex social game where influence and power dictated outcomes? Or was there an element of strategy, of conscious maneuvering, that complicates the narrative? Markus Anderson's revelations suggest a mix of both, teasing at details that hint at exploitation while also hinting at agency. The tension is almost unbearable. On one hand, the sympathy for someone potentially used by the powerful. On the other, the intrigue of someone who might have navigated these circles with a keen awareness of opportunity. And just when you think the story might settle into a predictable pattern, Markus drops the bombshell that shifts everything. The identities of some Soho House clients, the nature of their dealings, and the context of Meghan's interactions are exposed in ways that create immediate consequences. Alliances fracture, reputations hang in the balance, and Harry's reaction becomes a focal point of both media attention and human drama. There's a complexity here that goes beyond simple scandal. It's a case study in power, influence, loyalty, and betrayal, all unfolding in real time, with no room for error and no easy resolution. The introduction cannot end without acknowledging the stakes. This isn't just about gossip. It's about trust, reputation, and personal consequences in a world where the private and public spheres are inseparable. Markus Anderson's leak forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. That in elite circles, even those with protection, influence, and visibility can be vulnerable. It forces us to question assumptions, to reconsider narratives, and to look deeper at the human dynamics behind the headlines. And it forces Harry, Meghan, and everyone involved to face consequences that extend far beyond the immediate scandal. And yet, even now, as this introduction draws to a close, one question lingers, creating the perfect bridge to the next chapter. What comes next when secrets are revealed, loyalties are tested, and the people who wield power aren't always who they appear to be? Markus Anderson has opened the door, but the full story, the devastating revelations, and the emotional fallout are only beginning. And what comes next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started quietly. At least, it appeared quiet to everyone else. In the labyrinthine world of royalty, media, and private social circles, whispers often pass unnoticed, until one of them detonates like a bomb. Markus Anderson's leak was exactly that. A carefully timed explosion disguised as a whisper, and when it landed, the reverberations were felt across continents. Imagine being on the inside of a story you've only ever seen from the outside. That's the position Harry found himself in, a position of vulnerability he hadn't anticipated, despite years of media training and public scrutiny. For a moment, everything he thought was private, everything he believed was shielded by the careful architecture of his life, was suddenly laid bare. Markus Anderson wasn't a name anyone outside certain circles would recognize. He wasn't a tabloid journalist or a paparazzo, the kind who chase every scandal for clicks and headlines. No, Markus was someone far more insidious in his subtlety, a social insider, a man with access, observation, and the ability to capture truths that others would kill to keep hidden. His credibility was not built on gossip, but on proximity. He had seen things, heard things, and now he chose to reveal them. And the world would never see Meghan and Harry the same way again. The leak itself was devastating in its precision. It wasn't a vague claim or an opinion masquerading as fact. These were specifics, dates, interactions, names, and circumstances that no casual observer could guess. Markus had managed to construct a web of proof that painted a picture of Meghan's movements through the elite world of Soho House in a way that was almost cinematic. Every handshake, every private dinner, every seemingly innocuous encounter became loaded with new meaning. And when Harry saw it, when the images, messages, and corroborated stories hit him, the response was immediate. Shock, disbelief, and a rising tide of anger and worry. Now, Imagine the scene behind palace walls. Harry, a man so often expected to maintain composure, pacing a room with thoughts racing in every direction. His mind was a blur of concern. For Meghan, for their children, for the public narrative that was already beginning to twist in ways he could neither predict nor control. The royal system, for all its grandeur, provides little protection when personal betrayal intersects with public spectacle. And in that moment, Harry felt the full weight of both worlds crashing down. Markus Anderson's leak didn't just expose actions, it exposed vulnerabilities. It revealed patterns, tendencies, and relationships that were previously invisible to the outside world. And it did so in a way that was impossible to ignore. There was an irony here that Harry would have appreciated if he weren't so emotionally charged. The very mechanisms designed to protect individuals from public scrutiny, exclusive spaces, private clubs, curated appearances, were the very tools Markus used to uncover the truth. Soho House, the sanctuary of privacy and exclusivity, became the stage for public scandal. But it wasn't just the content of the leak that caused havoc. It was the timing, the way it landed when Harry and Meghan were already under intense public and media pressure. In the days and weeks prior, the couple had been navigating a series of challenges, personal, professional, and relational. And Markus, whether deliberately or not, chose the moment when the impact would be maximum, when the ripple effects would reach every corner of their lives. It was a masterstroke of disruption, one that required neither malice nor intent, only the leverage of knowledge and opportunity. The leak's implications extended far beyond simple embarrassment. Every name, every interaction, every VIP connection revealed by Markus had potential consequences. Friends became sources of scrutiny. Associates became subject to speculation. And the public? The public consumed it all with ravenous curiosity, dissecting every detail, constructing narratives, and creating moral judgments without context. For Harry, the challenge was twofold: process the personal betrayal and anticipate the public fallout, all while protecting those he loved most. Imagine being Meghan in that scenario. The images of her at Soho House, curated for discretion, suddenly reinterpreted through the lens of Markus Anderson's revelations, transformed into something entirely different. Smiles became calculated gestures. Handshakes became exchanges laden with hidden intent. Every appearance was now reframed by the leak, and suddenly, what had been private became a public spectacle. For someone who had already endured the intense glare of media scrutiny, the sensation of being both exposed and misrepresented was devastating. And the world watched. Social media erupted, news outlets scrambled, and conspiracy theories blossomed. Hashtags trended, commentators speculated, and every public statement, or lack thereof, was dissected for hidden meaning. The leak did what no journalist could do in months. It collapsed the gap between public perception and private reality. It forced Harry and Meghan into a position they had sought to avoid, being defensive, reactive, and, at times, vulnerable in ways that were deeply personal. Markus Anderson's motivations, though unclear, added another layer of intrigue. Was this a deliberate attempt to damage Meghan, to destabilize Harry, or merely the result of a leak that Markus felt the world deserved to know? Every detail suggests intent, but intent is a slippery concept in a story layered with secrecy, loyalty, and hidden agendas. The uncertainty amplified the tension. When the source is as close and credible as Markus, every revelation is met with disbelief and fear, yet cannot be easily dismissed. The psychological impact on Harry cannot be overstated. Protective instincts, so long honed by his life in the public eye, were triggered like an alarm that would not be silenced. The anger, frustration, and helplessness were compounded by the knowledge that this leak was not merely information. It was narrative-shaping ammunition. Every word Markus released would be interpreted, twisted, and amplified by a media machine that rarely pauses to consider nuance. The emotional stakes were immense. This was not gossip. It was a threat to personal and familial integrity. And then there's the broader context. Meghan Markle, already a lightning rod for public debate, was now cast into a new narrative. The leak didn't just expose her actions. It exposed vulnerabilities, potential manipulation, and intersections with powerful, shadowy figures. The story Markus told was complex, layered, and explosive, blending social intrigue with emotional consequence in ways few anticipated. What seemed like private networking became a moral and social battlefield, where perception, reputation, and truth collided with devastating force. But perhaps the most critical element of all was timing. Markus had released this information at a precise moment, when Harry's focus was split, Meghan's public presence under scrutiny, and the media landscape primed for maximum impact. Every leak has potential consequences, but few can orchestrate timing with this level of precision. The result? Immediate disruption, escalating tension, and a narrative that would dominate discussions for weeks, if not months. As the first shockwaves of Markus Anderson's leak settled, Harry and Meghan were forced to confront multiple realities simultaneously: personal betrayal, public scrutiny, and the opaque nature of elite social networks. Soho House, once a place of discretion, had become the epicenter of a story that was just beginning to unfold. And Harry's response, calculated yet deeply emotional, would become a defining moment in how this scandal, or revelation, was perceived. Even now, as details continue to emerge, one thing is certain: Markus Anderson's leak did more than reveal names, dates, and interactions. It exposed vulnerabilities, tested loyalties, and forced the royal couple to navigate a minefield of consequences they could neither ignore nor control. And as the story continues, one question looms larger than all others. What happens next when secrets are exposed, reputations are at stake, and the people involved are forced to respond to truths they never anticipated? From the outside, Soho House looks like any other exclusive members club: stylish interiors, carefully curated art, plush seating, and an unspoken rule of discretion that allows celebrities, influencers, and power brokers to mingle away from prying eyes. To the uninitiated, it's a chic retreat, a networking haven, and a playground of luxury. But beneath that polished exterior lies a world few ever truly understand. A world where every glance, every handshake, and every conversation carries unspoken weight, where influence is currency and opportunity often comes disguised as casual social interaction. And Meghan Markle, stepping into this world, was not merely a guest. She was navigating a high-stakes landscape that most would never even realize exists. When Markus Anderson first documented her visits, he didn't just note her presence. He mapped the connections, the patterns, the subtle interplay between Meghan and the other members of Soho House. On the surface, she laughed, sipped her drinks, and mingled. But beneath it all, every interaction was potentially significant. VIPs, executives, and cultural influencers all inhabit this environment with precise awareness, each movement and word calculated, whether consciously or subconsciously, to serve their own interests. And for Meghan, even moments of casual socializing could carry repercussions, both personal and professional. Consider, for instance, the dynamics of the rooms she entered. Soho House isn't just a collection of spaces. It's a carefully choreographed environment where the architecture, lighting, and seating all contribute to the subtle orchestration of interactions. In one corner, a tech CEO might casually discuss funding opportunities. In another, an entertainment executive might hint at media strategies. Meanwhile, political influencers or international figures could subtly gauge loyalty, discretion, and potential alliances. Every smile Meghan gave, every nod, and even her body language became part of a complex network of observation, interpretation, and sometimes manipulation. Markus's notes, meticulous and detailed, revealed just how closely these dynamics were monitored and how easily they could be weaponized in the wrong hands. One of the most revealing aspects of Meghan's Soho House appearances was the diversity of the VIPs she encountered. Markus's leak indicated a spectrum of individuals ranging from high-profile financiers to media moguls to lesser-known figures wielding disproportionate behind-the-scenes influence. Each interaction had layers. Some appeared casual, some strategic, and some disturbingly manipulative. The mix of personal charm, professional ambition, and unspoken agendas made for a volatile environment, and the leak exposed just how precariously Meghan balanced these competing pressures. There were nights when Meghan arrived with subtle purpose. According to Markus, Some of her encounters involved introductions to potential collaborators for projects she was exploring outside the royal sphere. Others were purely social, designed to maintain connections, establish credibility, and navigate networks she might later rely upon. But even these seemingly benign interactions were scrutinized, evaluated, and recorded, sometimes for public consumption, sometimes for private leverage. The complexity of these interactions cannot be overstated. A smile exchanged in one room could later be interpreted as alignment, approval, or complicity, depending on who was watching. And then there were the interactions that veered into ethically gray territory. Markus's notes suggested that certain VIPs sought to exploit Meghan's presence, leveraging her status to gain access, validation, or influence. Whether it was through subtle pressure, carefully framed requests, or insinuations, the leak paints a picture of a world where power is fluid, loyalty is conditional, and no action exists in isolation. Meghan, intentionally or otherwise, was navigating this world while under the weight of public expectation, media scrutiny, and her own personal moral compass. The tension between private agency and public perception is central to understanding the fallout that followed. Markus's documentation went further, providing details of patterns and behaviors. Meghan's choices, where she sat, whom she engaged with, and the timing of her interactions were not random. Each decision, consciously or not, created a ripple effect that Markus observed, logged, and ultimately exposed. For example, a seemingly casual conversation with a high-profile financier might later become a talking point among VIPs, a subtle signal of alliance or endorsement. The leak revealed that the environment of Soho House is not just social. It is a stage for influence, subtle negotiations, and strategic positioning. And in this environment, every participant is both actor and audience, simultaneously shaping and being shaped by the interactions around them. For Harry, learning about these interactions through Markus's leak was profoundly unsettling. He understood that the public perception of Meghan, how the world viewed her, was now entangled with these hidden realities. Each engagement at Soho House carried potential for misinterpretation, manipulation, or exploitation. Harry's protective instincts, already heightened by years of navigating media storms, recognized the stakes immediately. To him, it wasn't just about social appearances. It was about the preservation of trust, safety, and the integrity of their private lives. One particularly striking revelation in the leak was the pattern of VIPs who repeatedly sought out Meghan. Markus's observations suggested more than casual networking. They hinted at a system of influence in which Meghan's presence was leveraged repeatedly for access, visibility, or validation. The repeated nature of these interactions raised questions about agency, consent, and power dynamics. Was Meghan fully aware of the implications of these encounters, or was she being subtly maneuvered into situations that served the interests of others more than her own? This ambiguity fuels the drama, the tension, and the emotional stakes of the unfolding story. But what makes the Soho House revelations particularly compelling is the contrast between public image and private reality. To the media and the public, Meghan's life appeared glamorous, controlled, and enviable. Photos, curated posts, and occasional appearances suggested confidence, poise, and strategic agency. Yet the leak exposes a parallel reality, one where Meghan's every interaction is loaded with potential consequence, and where the stakes extend far beyond the immediate social scene. It's a world where influence, manipulation, and opportunity intertwine, often invisibly, and where the lines between voluntary engagement and subtle coercion blur. The leak also revealed the subtleties of the environment itself. Markus described private rooms where negotiations and alliances unfolded behind closed doors, where whispers carried as much weight as formal agreements. It's a place where loyalty is tested quietly, where observation often matters more than spoken words, and where status is constantly measured through nuance, attention, and positioning. Meghan, navigating this environment, was now revealed to be both participant and subject, operating within constraints that few outside these circles could even recognize. And yet, within these complexities, Markus's leak hinted at agency, strategy, and conscious choice. Meghan was not merely a passive observer. Some of her interactions demonstrated an awareness of the power dynamics at play, a calculated approach to engagement, and an understanding of when to assert presence and when to withdraw. This duality, between being influenced and exercising influence, adds a rich layer of complexity to the narrative, heightening both intrigue and emotional impact. Harry's perspective, filtered through Markus's leak, reveals another dimension entirely. Each piece of information, each name, each interaction, each subtle nuance adds layers of concern. His protective instincts are heightened, not just for Meghan's reputation, but for her well-being, autonomy, and safety. And while Meghan moves within a sphere that requires tact, diplomacy, and social skill, Harry's reaction underscores the personal stakes, the emotional weight, and the profound consequences of the leak. As the night-to-night interactions at Soho House unfold in Markus's notes, a pattern emerges. Meghan is surrounded by a mix of genuine allies, opportunists, and manipulators. The lines between friendship, professional engagement, and exploitation blur in ways that are both fascinating and unsettling. Each decision she makes, each connection she navigates, now carries the potential to be reframed, reinterpreted, and weaponized. And the leak, precise in its detail, forces both Harry and the audience to confront the complexities of a world most will never see. Yet, even as the narrative deepens, one question persists. Was Meghan fully aware of the forces at play, or was she, in some ways, being used by those who understood the environment far better than she did? Markus's leak doesn't provide easy answers, but it illuminates the tension, the stakes, and the human drama that underpins every interaction. For Harry, the revelation is both painful and galvanizing. For Meghan, it raises questions about agency, perception, and the hidden costs of navigating elite social circles. And as these connections are unpacked, one thing becomes undeniable. Soho House is more than a backdrop. It is a microcosm of influence, power, and strategy. It is a world where appearances are carefully curated, interactions are meticulously measured, and consequences, both subtle and profound, are unavoidable. Meghan's presence in this world, illuminated by Markus Anderson's leak, sets the stage for conflict, drama, and emotional stakes that will ripple far beyond the walls of the club. But just as the patterns of engagement become clear, the leak hints at something deeper. Alliances shifting, intentions hidden, and actions that will have consequences Harry and Meghan cannot yet fully predict. And what comes next, the reactions, the fallout, and the emotional upheaval, is about to push this story into uncharted territory. The private becomes public, the familiar becomes threatening, and the world is left wondering who really controls the narrative and who is being played. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When the leak first hit Harry's awareness, the initial moment was almost surreal. It wasn't a gradual realization, it was instantaneous, like a punch to the gut. Imagine sitting in the privacy of a room you've been conditioned to see as a sanctuary, a place where your family and your closest confidants are meant to be shielded from the chaos of public life. And suddenly, the world outside and the truths inside collide with explosive force. Markus Anderson's leak wasn't a distant media story or a rumor you could dismiss. It was raw, direct, and intimately connected to everything Harry valued most: trust, family, and control over the narrative of his life. The first reaction was disbelief. How could this have happened? How could someone have documented and exposed moments that were meant to be private, moments that held significance not just socially but personally, and moments that now had the potential to damage both Meghan and the life they were building together? The cognitive dissonance was immediate. Harry had navigated media storms for years. He had learned to filter the noise, to brace for criticism. But this was different. This was precision targeting, coming from someone who had access to truths only a handful of people could know. And it cut deeper than any press attack ever could. There was anger, too, a fierce, almost protective rage. Harry's instinct has always been to shield those he loves, and to see Meghan, his wife, the mother of his children, the partner he trusted, placed under such intense scrutiny was unbearable. Yet, the anger was complex. It wasn't directed solely at Markus Anderson. It extended to the culture that allowed such leaks to have weight, the media machinery that amplifies scandal at the expense of nuance, and the silent social forces that exist within exclusive circles like Soho House. Every layer of this situation was a threat, every unseen hand a potential manipulator, and Harry felt the full weight of his role as protector. Emotionally, the impact was layered. There was a creeping sense of vulnerability, the understanding that no amount of preparation or media training could insulate them from this type of exposure. Trust, something Harry has historically guarded fiercely, suddenly felt fragile. Questions that normally would have seemed irrelevant now loomed large. Who can be trusted? Which friendships are genuine? How do you protect your family from a world where secrets are currency and every connection carries risk? Markus's leak transformed these questions from theoretical to urgent, and Harry experienced the emotional intensity of confronting them head-on. In private, the dynamics of the reaction were complicated further by concern for Meghan. Harry's protective instincts extended beyond public image. They were deeply personal, almost visceral. He recognized that the leak could cause real harm to Meghan's sense of autonomy and security, and he grappled with feelings of helplessness. Unlike public controversies that could be countered with statements, interviews, or careful media manipulation, this leak operated in a space of nuance and interpretation that was difficult to control. The complexity of the social interactions, combined with the intimacy of the revelations, meant that Harry was not just reacting to scandal. He was reacting to potential exploitation of the people he cared about most. Yet, even in this storm of emotion, Harry's response was strategic. He is, after all, a man trained in navigating both public scrutiny and personal vulnerability. His immediate concern was to understand the scope of the leak, the intentions behind Markus Anderson's actions, and the potential ripple effects. Every detail had to be assessed: the credibility of the information, the relationships involved, and the ways in which media coverage might distort or amplify the narrative. Harry's analytical mind, honed over decades of exposure to high-stakes situations, now worked in tandem with his emotional core, creating a tense interplay of instinct and calculation. There was also a profound sense of betrayal layered within the reaction. Not necessarily personal betrayal by Meghan, but betrayal by the world around him. By insiders who allowed information to slip, by a system that prioritizes exposure over empathy, and by the subtle machinations of those who see influence as leverage. Harry's private response was suffused with a mix of disbelief, anger, and protective determination, a cocktail of emotion that underscores the intensity of the situation. Every personal and familial instinct converged with the acute awareness that this leak was more than just a story. It was a force that could reshape perception and redefine relationships. Sleep became difficult. Nights were filled with replaying moments, analyzing interactions, and anticipating consequences. Harry's mind oscillated between protecting Meghan, managing public perception, and preparing for the social and emotional fallout that would inevitably follow. Even in the relative privacy of his home, the intensity of the leak made itself known. Every phone notification, every media alert, every social media post became a potential escalation, a reminder that control over the narrative had shifted, at least temporarily, into external hands. But Harry's reaction wasn't solely about anger or strategy. There was fear, too. Fear for the stability of his family unit, for the long-term consequences of exposure, and for the ways in which public misinterpretation could magnify private turmoil. Markus Anderson's leak wasn't just a collection of facts. It was a catalyst, setting in motion a chain of events that Harry could foresee but not fully control. The emotional stakes were immense: trust, loyalty, and love, all tested in real time. In the quiet moments, the impact became personal. Harry would reflect on the irony of a world that so admires privacy yet relentlessly exploits it. He would question the authenticity of relationships, the boundaries of trust, and the resilience of those he loved. He understood, acutely, that the public would never fully grasp the emotional weight of the leak, the tension of watching your private life reframed as a narrative of intrigue and potential manipulation. Yet, as intense as these emotions were, they did not paralyze him. They galvanized him. Harry's protective instincts transformed into action plans. Identifying allies, analyzing evidence, and anticipating both public and private consequences. Every decision had to account for perception, impact, and long-term effect. And in this process, he was forced to confront a harsh truth. The very world that Markus Anderson exposed is a world that cannot be fully controlled, and no level of preparation can entirely prevent the pain and disruption caused by the revelation of private truths. And then there was the emotional paradox. While anger and fear surged, there was also clarity. The leak illuminated vulnerabilities, yes, but it also revealed what truly mattered: family, trust, and the integrity of relationships. Harry's private reaction, intense and multifaceted, became a guide for navigating the storm. The emotional spikes, the moral judgments, and the protective calculations all converged to form a strategic and deeply personal response, one rooted in love, loyalty, and resilience. Even as the initial shock began to settle, the questions remained. How would Meghan respond? Which allies could be trusted? What were Markus Anderson's motivations? The leak had shifted the ground beneath them, exposing both vulnerability and agency, uncertainty and opportunity. Harry's private reaction, intense, calculated, and deeply human, set the stage for the next wave of consequences, where trust, perception, and influence would collide in unpredictable ways. And what came next would test Harry in ways he never anticipated, and it would force him to confront truths about the world around him that were as shocking as they were unavoidable. The world of Soho House is deceptively glamorous. To the casual observer, its velvet curtains, dimmed chandeliers, and the quiet hum of conversation over cocktails. But for those in the know, it is a crucible of power, influence, and calculated positioning. Every room, every interaction, every toast carries potential leverage, and the people Meghan Markle encountered there were far from casual acquaintances. They were movers and shakers, VIPs whose lives are dictated as much by subtle influence as by overt authority. Markus Anderson's leak lifted the veil on this world, revealing a complex lattice of power plays, alliances, and hidden agendas that few outside elite social circles could comprehend. From the moment Meghan entered Soho House, she was entering a networked ecosystem, one governed not by rules of etiquette alone, but by the unspoken codes of access, loyalty, and discretion. Markus's documentation detailed these interactions meticulously. CEOs who shape global markets, media executives who control narratives, and cultural influencers whose silent nods can elevate careers, all moved around her in a dance of observation and manipulation. And Meghan, with her public visibility and royal connections, was an asset as well as a target, an individual whose presence could be leveraged in ways both subtle and overt. The VIPs she interacted with were a study in contrasts. Some were genuinely charmed by her presence, eager to exchange ideas, collaborate, or simply connect socially. Others, Markus revealed, had motives far more strategic. Each handshake, each side conversation, each fleeting smile was recorded, not just for posterity, but as a potential tool of influence. Markus's leak suggested that some VIPs were calculating the ways Meghan's social and royal capital could be converted into advantage for themselves. Introductions, endorsements, and subtle reputation-building moves that, if leveraged correctly, could yield immense returns. One of the most striking elements revealed in the leak was the pattern of repeated engagements. Certain individuals sought Meghan out more than once, creating an appearance of familiarity, even friendship, while potentially masking strategic intentions. Markus's notes indicate that these repeated interactions were not random socializing, but carefully orchestrated positioning. In a world where influence is currency, knowing the right person, being seen in the right circle, and cultivating subtle bonds can be as powerful as signing a business deal or delivering a speech to a global audience. The environment itself encourages this subtle interplay of power. Soho House is designed to create intimacy and comfort, yet every architectural decision, from private rooms to secluded lounges, reinforces observation and interaction. VIPs move through these spaces like chess pieces, with Meghan as a piece of both visibility and influence. Markus's leak makes it clear that even small actions, sharing a drink, laughing at a joke, or being photographed in the right corner, can carry outsized consequences in these circles. What appears casual to outsiders is laden with meaning behind the velvet curtains. Some of the VIPs documented in the leak were particularly adept at leveraging social dynamics to create opportunity. Markus's notes describe instances where Meghan was subtly guided toward conversations that could be amplified later or introduced to individuals whose influence could be strategically beneficial. The line between social engagement and calculated maneuvering was blurred, and the leak highlighted how delicate Meghan's navigation of these spaces had to be. One misstep, one misread cue, and the consequences could ripple outward in ways both professional and personal. Yet, not all interactions were purely transactional. Markus's documentation also captured moments of genuine connection, collaborative energy, and shared enthusiasm. These instances, however, were complicated by the awareness that every smile, every exchange, and every seemingly private conversation could be reframed once outside the room. For Meghan, balancing authentic engagement with an awareness of the stakes was an ongoing challenge, one that Markus's leak illuminated with unflinching clarity. Harry's awareness of these dynamics intensified the emotional stakes. For him, understanding that Meghan was not merely socializing but interacting in a space where subtle power plays and influence campaigns are constantly at work added layers of concern. Protecting her from misinterpretation, manipulation, or exploitation became a constant mental and emotional exercise. Markus's leak was not just a record of interactions. It was a blueprint of vulnerability, mapping the moments where public perception, private intent, and strategic maneuvering intersected in ways that could threaten both Meghan's reputation and their family's stability. The VIPs themselves are worth examining. Markus's notes identified categories of influence: financiers with global reach, media moguls who control narratives, cultural tastemakers capable of shifting public perception, and social strategists who operate quietly but effectively. Each brought a distinct set of tools and intentions to the table, and Meghan's presence was both an opportunity and a potential liability. Engaging with them required astute awareness, quick judgment, and emotional intelligence, all while under the constant gaze of public scrutiny. One particularly concerning aspect revealed by Markus was the subtle methods some VIPs used to assert influence. Invitations to private rooms, exclusive events, and small, controlled group gatherings were leveraged to create dependency, cultivate loyalty, or test reactions. The leak detailed instances where Meghan's responses were analyzed not just socially, but strategically, by those who understood the power of perception and the leverage of subtle manipulation. For Harry, learning about these methods underscored the stakes. This was not merely socializing. It was navigating a minefield where every misstep could have amplified consequences. At the same time, Markus's notes highlighted Meghan's agency and adaptability. She was not a passive participant. Her awareness, charm, and strategic thinking allowed her to navigate these spaces with remarkable skill. Yet even the most astute navigation could not eliminate vulnerability entirely. The leak exposed moments of exposure, where intentions were unclear, alliances were shifting, and actions could be misinterpreted. In a world where power, secrecy, and influence are intertwined, control is always relative, never absolute. The combination of genuine opportunity, subtle manipulation, and strategic interaction created a tension that permeated every visit. Markus Anderson's leak did not just capture names and dates. It captured emotional stakes, social calculations, and the invisible currents of influence that govern elite spaces like Soho House. For Harry, understanding these dynamics was both enlightening and alarming. The leak provided clarity about potential risks, yet also heightened the awareness of vulnerability inherent in every interaction Meghan had with these VIPs. By the end of the documented period, a pattern emerges. Meghan's Soho House visits were a microcosm of influence, ambition, and subtle manipulation. Each engagement was a test, each connection a potential lever, and each observation a data point in a network that few outsiders could comprehend. Markus Anderson's leak transformed these nights of social engagement into a detailed map of opportunity, risk, and hidden power dynamics. And as the leak continued to reverberate, the larger implications became unavoidable. Who could be trusted? who was truly an ally, and who was exploiting circumstances for personal gain. Harry and Meghan were suddenly navigating not just private interactions, but the broader consequences of exposure, perception, and strategic calculation. Every relationship, every engagement, and every observation became a variable in a complex equation of trust, influence, and personal consequence. And just when it seemed that Meghan had understood and controlled her environment, Markus's leak suggested otherwise, hinting at subtle manipulations and hidden intentions that would soon force both Meghan and Harry to confront the realities of power in ways they had not anticipated. And what came next would reshape alliances, redefine perceptions, and reveal the true cost of navigating a world where influence and vulnerability are inseparable, and no one saw it coming. The word exploitation is heavy. It carries moral weight, cultural resonance, and an emotional charge that is difficult to ignore. And yet, when Markus Anderson's leak surfaced, that word became unavoidable. Because what it revealed about Meghan Markle's interactions within Soho House, and more broadly within elite social networks, was not simply a question of socializing or networking. It was a glimpse into a world where influence, status, and opportunity are currencies that can be extracted from even the most seemingly innocent interactions. The ethical questions are complex. When does opportunity cross into manipulation? When does charm mask coercion? And when does access to power demand a cost that is invisible to the casual observer? From the moment the leak went public, the framing of Meghan's actions was immediate and polarizing. Critics were quick to label her as someone being opportunistic, while supporters framed her as a strategic, savvy individual navigating a complex social ecosystem. Yet, the truth, illuminated by Markus's detailed documentation, was far less binary. Meghan existed in a space where agency and vulnerability coexisted, where every choice carried implications, and where ethical considerations were as subtle as they were profound. The leak exposed moments that forced observers, and Harry himself, to wrestle with the tension between public perception and private reality. One of the most striking elements of Markus's leak is the pattern of repeated engagement by certain VIPs. These were not fleeting encounters. They were carefully orchestrated interactions designed to cultivate influence. Some were transactional, others subtly coercive, and a few may have bordered on manipulation. Markus's notes suggest that Meghan, knowingly or unknowingly, was navigating a web in which every smile, handshake, and conversation could be leveraged. The ethical question emerges: was she being used, or was she an active participant in a calculated social strategy? The environment of Soho House itself complicates the matter. It is designed to facilitate trust, intimacy, and openness, but those very qualities can be weaponized. VIPs operate within unspoken codes of influence, using charm, proximity, and access as tools to extract information, loyalty, or validation. In this environment, what appears casual or social is often loaded with consequence. Markus Anderson's leak highlights these dynamics, demonstrating how easily power can be exercised subtly and how easily someone like Meghan, no matter how experienced, could become a target of strategic influence. Harry's response to these ethical considerations is deeply personal. For him, the line between strategic engagement and exploitation is not just philosophical, it is visceral. The idea that his wife could be manipulated, used, or misrepresented in spaces meant for trust and discretion ignites protective instincts and emotional intensity. Markus's leak doesn't merely document interactions, it exposes vulnerabilities, forcing Harry to evaluate the motives, intentions, and moral compass of those around Meghan. Each revelation brings both clarity and heightened concern, revealing that influence without accountability can quickly become a form of exploitation. Yet, the leak also suggests complexity in Meghan's role. She is not depicted as a passive victim. Rather, Markus's documentation shows instances of deliberate engagement, awareness of influence dynamics, and careful social navigation. This duality raises further ethical questions. When one possesses visibility, influence, or social leverage, what responsibility exists in managing interactions? And conversely, when others exploit that visibility, what accountability should apply? These are not questions with simple answers. Yet Markus's leak forces them into the spotlight, where public scrutiny and personal consequence converge. Consider, for example, instances where VIPs subtly guided Meghan toward opportunities or conversations that served their interests. On the surface, these interactions appear mutually beneficial: networking, collaboration, and strategic alliances. But Markus's notes indicate that some of these moments carried asymmetric power dynamics. Meghan's access and social capital were leveraged in ways that were invisible to the public, creating a tension between consent, choice, and manipulation. In ethical terms, this raises fundamental questions about agency. When does engagement become exploitation, and how can one navigate such complex spaces without compromise? Markus's leak also highlights the psychological toll of this environment. Being constantly evaluated, observed, and leveraged imposes a form of pressure that is both subtle and profound. Meghan's experiences within Soho House, as documented, suggest moments of discomfort, hesitation, and strategic decision-making, all of which underscore the human impact of navigating elite social spheres. The leak exposes not just the mechanics of influence, but the emotional and moral stakes, reminding us that ethical breaches are not only structural, but deeply personal. Harry's concern extends beyond perception. It touches on well-being. Exploitation, in any form, carries consequences for mental health, trust, and relational stability. Markus's leak forces the couple to confront these realities, and in doing so, raises broader societal questions. How often are individuals in high-visibility roles subjected to subtle exploitation? How do cultural and social hierarchies enable it? And perhaps most importantly, how can one distinguish between genuine connection and manipulative influence when the lines are deliberately blurred? The ethical dilemma is compounded by public scrutiny. Once Markus's leak circulated, interpretation became as powerful as fact. Observers constructed narratives, moral judgments were rendered, and social media became a battlefield of opinion and accusation. The consequences of exposure extend beyond private circles, influencing public perception, reputation, and the moral framing of events. Harry, acutely aware of this dynamic, recognizes that ethical evaluation cannot exist in isolation. It must consider both private reality and public impact. Yet, even as ethical concerns intensify, the leak also demonstrates agency. Meghan's navigation of Soho House interactions reveals an awareness of power dynamics, a strategic application of social intelligence, and a deliberate engagement with opportunities. Markus's documentation illustrates that vulnerability and agency coexist, creating a morally complex portrait that challenges simplistic judgments. The narrative is not of victimhood alone. It is of negotiation, resilience, and careful consideration in a space where influence is both invisible and pervasive. The leak further reveals the subtle mechanisms by which exploitation can occur. Markus documented behaviors such as selective attention, the cultivation of dependence, and the strategic framing of interactions. These methods are often invisible to outsiders, yet they shape outcomes and manipulate perception. For Harry, understanding these patterns is crucial. It is not only a matter of protecting Meghan, but of interpreting the intentions of those who wield power in hidden ways. The ethical stakes, therefore, are deeply intertwined with personal, relational, and social consequences. By the end of Markus's revelations, one conclusion is unavoidable: Soho House, and spaces like it, operate on principles that blur the lines between opportunity and exploitation. Influence is wielded subtly, and access is both a privilege and a potential liability. Meghan's interactions, meticulously documented in the leak, illuminate a world where ethical navigation is complex, vulnerability is inevitable, and every decision carries moral and emotional weight. And as Harry and Meghan process the implications, one question emerges, heavier than any headline or social media post. In a world where influence and manipulation intersect, how do you maintain integrity, agency, and trust? Markus Anderson's leak does not answer this question. It amplifies it, laying bare the tensions, vulnerabilities, and ethical ambiguities of navigating a world designed for power, visibility, and subtle control. And what came next would force both Meghan and Harry to confront the boundaries of trust, loyalty, and morality in ways that neither could have anticipated, and no one saw it coming. The moment Markus Anderson's leak hit the public, the media landscape erupted with a force that seemed almost predestined. Headlines flashed across screens, news alerts pinged relentlessly, and social media accounts churned with commentary, speculation, and opinion. The leak didn't just expose Meghan Markle's interactions at Soho House. It ignited a global conversation about influence, vulnerability, and the delicate balance between private life and public scrutiny. Harry watched as the controlled, curated world they had tried to maintain for years suddenly fractured under the weight of exposure. From the first moment, the media reaction was intense, polarized, and relentless. Tabloid outlets painted the story in broad strokes, emphasizing scandal, secrecy, and moral ambiguity. Social media commentators dissected every detail, drawing conclusions often divorced from context. Influencers and bloggers amplified each revelation, creating a cascade of speculation that was impossible to contain. Markus Anderson's leak, precise and detailed, became the spark in a powder keg of public fascination, feeding a fire that would not subside for weeks. The initial headlines framed Meghan in dramatic, often contradictory ways. Some narratives cast her as a social strategist navigating elite circles with skill and poise. Others framed her as a pawn in a game of exploitation, manipulated by VIPs who understood the subtle art of influence. Markus's leak provided the evidence, the granular details, and the timeline that made these contrasting interpretations possible. To the public, the images of Meghan smiling, interacting, and socializing were suddenly reinterpreted through a lens of suspicion, strategy, and hidden intent. Harry's awareness of the media storm heightened the emotional stakes. The leak, combined with the ensuing public frenzy, placed him in an impossible position. Protect Meghan, manage perception, and respond to an information ecosystem that thrived on misinterpretation and sensationalism. Every media mention, every viral post, every headline was a reminder that public perception had become another battlefield. Harry, already acutely attuned to the power of narrative, understood that the challenge was not just to respond, but to anticipate, mitigate, and strategically manage consequences in real time. Social media, in particular, intensified the situation. Platforms designed for rapid engagement amplified the smallest details into viral talking points. Every leaked detail from Markus Anderson became content, interpreted, shared, and reframed across millions of feeds. Memes, opinion threads, and commentary surged, some sympathetic, some critical, some aggressively speculative. For Harry, the immediacy and scale of these reactions were both astonishing and alarming. The leak had moved beyond private circles into a global conversation that could not be controlled. Media outlets competed fiercely for exclusives, insights, and analysis. Journalists scoured Markus's leak for patterns, corroborated evidence, and potential implications. Each outlet, seeking to differentiate its coverage, emphasized different angles. Some highlighted ethical concerns, some focused on social dynamics, and some framed the story as a narrative of manipulation and power. The result was a cacophony of interpretation, a complex media ecosystem in which facts, opinion, and moral judgment intermingled. Harry's response to the media storm was strategic but emotionally charged. He recognized that any public statement, defense, or clarification carried risks, misrepresentation, further scrutiny, or unintended consequences. Markus Anderson's leak had shifted the narrative from private interactions to public speculation, and Harry had to navigate the delicate balance between protecting Meghan and managing perception. The intensity of the media coverage forced a heightened awareness of timing, framing, and messaging. Every word, every gesture, and every public appearance was scrutinized. Public perception, shaped in part by the media frenzy, also introduced social and relational pressures. Friends, allies, and acquaintances reached out with advice, concern, or speculation. Some offered support, some questioned choices, and some subtly reinforced the notion that Meghan had been manipulated or misrepresented. Harry, absorbing both media content and social feedback, faced the dual challenge of interpreting reality and managing perception. Markus Anderson's leak had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond Soho House, into the global consciousness, and into the emotional lives of Harry and Meghan themselves. The leak also provoked intense debate about privacy and responsibility. Commentators asked, should private interactions, even in exclusive social spaces, be subject to public scrutiny? What obligations do insiders like Markus Anderson have in revealing sensitive information? And how do public figures navigate spaces designed for discretion while under constant observation? These debates, amplified by the media storm, framed the story as more than scandal. It became a conversation about ethics, influence, and the boundaries of personal and public life. Meanwhile, the emotional impact on Meghan was profound. Every leaked detail, every headline, and every viral post carried not just public scrutiny, but the weight of personal judgment. Markus Anderson's documentation had transformed private interactions into material for moral evaluation, creating an intense psychological environment. For Harry, observing Meghan's response, the mix of composure, strategic awareness, and emotional resilience was both impressive and heart-wrenching. The media storm was relentless, yet Meghan's ability to navigate it demonstrated strength under pressure, even as vulnerabilities were exposed. The leak also highlighted broader patterns within the media ecosystem itself. Journalists, influencers, and commentators are part of an intricate network where timing, framing, and narrative momentum dictate outcomes. Markus Anderson's revelations became raw material for this ecosystem, and the speed with which details were disseminated, interpreted, and reframed underscored the impossibility of controlling perception once information enters the public sphere. Harry, experienced in media dynamics yet personally invested, saw the storm not as mere information dissemination, but as a complex interplay of influence, interpretation, and consequence. One of the most difficult aspects for Harry was witnessing the public debate about intent and morality. Markus Anderson's leak had created a scenario where actions could be interpreted multiple ways, as strategic, opportunistic, manipulative, or simply social. Each interpretation carried implications, each judgment amplified by social media and news cycles. For Harry, the challenge was not merely understanding the leak itself, but managing the narratives it produced and mitigating the emotional and relational consequences for those he loved.